I started as an undergraduate student, I came up to York in October of 1973, and I came to read a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics with computer science as a subsidiary subject. So it was still at the very early stages. So at that point, I couldn't have chosen just computer science. There was no single subject degree program in computer science yet at York. But what really puzzled me was that programming was kind of like maths, and yet in other ways it wasn't. So I was always interested from the start in the question, so what's the relationship between mathematics and computer programming, for example? And in particular, I wanted to know about what was the maths behind the way computers were and the way programming languages were. And there were only 2 universities in the country who offered maths courses with computing, which tried to, in any way, to answer that question. One place was at Canterbury, the other place was at York. Actually, York rejected me initially. So just for the record, anybody watching this thinks, what happens if I apply to York but I get rejected? Well, I got rejected. So I just wrote back and said that I was disheartened to be rejected. And look, I didn't mind even if they made a really tough offer. At least I would have a chance. So would they reconsider? And they very kindly reconsidered. Like all undergraduates in those days, I had long hair, I was dressed in rags. I arrived at York railway station and with a rucksack on my back and asked the way to the university campus. And lots of new things. Freshers Week is a pretty intense experience. Everybody bombarding you with information, not just about your degree program, but would you like to go rock climbing? Do you want to join the Communist Party, and who knows what else? The beginning of academic studies were also interesting. I remember in a very early mathematics class being asked to prove that 0 was not equal to 1. And I was perplexed by the question, but I also loved it. When I knew that I wanted to do graduate studies, the question was in maths or in computer science. I was considering going to Cambridge for maths, but computer science was also just starting as a first-class citizen. And that was kind of exciting at York. And they're also very open. I mean, they wouldn't get away with it now, but I was permitted to embark and express an interest in graduate study of computer science. And my topic was quite simply programming. Well, as I say, you wouldn't get away with that now, but I enjoyed the openness and the possibility of pursuing sorts of questions I was interested in. And York was a nice place. I decided to remain at York. I obtained my lectureship, I think, by a very favourable providence towards me. I think the candidate who was almost certainly going to obtain the lectureship that in the end I obtained got an extremely severe case of flu and was unable to attend for interview. I actually hadn't applied for the job at all because my wife was by now having our first child, indeed had just given birth at around the time of these interviews. Somebody somewhere remembered me as having given some lectures at some point as a researcher, which weren't too bad, and that maybe in the difficult circumstances obtaining that their favoured candidate had vanished, maybe they should even consider me. But I got in through the back door, come on. And I enjoyed my work. The nearest thing we had to interactive programming was there was something called the Kent Online system, which allowed you, using a very slow and clunky teletype, to program interactively in BASIC. Well, that was pretty exciting. But if you wanted to write programs in any other programming language, then you prepared those very carefully on a sheet of paper. And you filled in the details of your program, writing very carefully in the boxes, and then you passed that across to a subsidiary office where some kindly ladies would transcribe your what you'd written in pencil on your filled in boxes, very literally and exactly, onto computer cards, and then it was either 3 times a day or 4 times a day, there was a batch run of any such programs that had been submitted. And so after a 2-hour wait, you might simply get the result, yes, you had a punctuation in your program at line 7, and so we stopped there, which of course could be pretty disappointing. And but because of the nature of the software I needed to use, I was reliant on the policies of the university time-shared computing system. And the time-shared computing system meant that essentially during the day it was geared up for many people doing fairly small things. And at night, people who needed to do bigger things were allowed to do them. Well, my research depended on a fairly big thing which I needed to use interactively, and the one time of day when I could have some hope of doing that was between midnight and 4 a.m. Why 4 a.m.? Well, because at 4 a.m. the policy got relaxed even more, and there was a huge program that was developed by a group in physics that was simulating the formation of the solar system, I should say. And their program just took every resource available on the machine, and the policy switched to make that allowed. So at 4 a.m. I had to down tools and give up until the following day at midnight. So those were the days. Time-shared computing. We took delivery of our first VAX computer, that's a particular make and kind of computer, and it came in huge cabinets, and it was dubbed Minster, because when you put it in the machine room alongside all the other little boxes which looked like a bit of a model village, if you like, there was one enormous cabinet that stood out above them all like a cathedral, and that machine came to be known as Minster, and was for a long time. And a lot of other ecclesiastically linked names were given to pieces of equipment in the department for some years to follow. Sadly, it no longer exists. It's off what's now called Market Square, where I guess it's a supermarket there, and where that's located. There used to be a single-story building that was known as Computation, I think, in those days. And that was the hub of things. The department was very small. It had a family kind of feel about it, really. Computer science was growing. I mean, of course, it's been a feature for all these decades. Computer science has just grown and grown in its activities. So trying to find somewhere to put us all was getting difficult. So we had an outpost in the chemistry building. And we were possibly the only software research laboratory in Europe that was equipped with gas taps and all the other things that chemists would usually need in their research. So that was an interesting time. There was a certain amount of banter between ourselves and the chemists, who were very kind hosts. We were engaged in very unsafe laboratory practice, such as hanging your coat up on the back of the door. Oh, that wasn't a good idea. That would be a terrible fire risk. And those printouts of computer programs that we like to keep stacked up in the corner of the room. Oh, that was a very dangerous thing to do in a laboratory. One night, the main block of the chemistry building blew up due to a very volatile experiment or something that blew up in a laboratory. What I remember of that is coming into work the next day, having no idea that this had taken place, and just arriving by bicycle, as I usually did. And it wasn't until I was actually barely 50 yards away that I noticed that the main block that I was heading to actually wasn't there, and there were just firemen playing their hoses over the smouldering ruins. One of the very real consequences of that for us, aside from the poor chemists needing to be reaccommodated and so on, as computing people, we suddenly realized, wow, everything that we did could have gone up in flames, because this was before the days of networking and putting things in the cloud and all that kind of business. And all our work was on physical devices that were stored somewhere, disks, tapes, etc. So Ian Want, who was the leader of our research group, said, okay, we must get a fireproof cabinet and we must make copies of everything we do, and we'll keep the copies in the fireproof cabinet, and we'll even have another copy in another building. I think a lot of us have some fondness for the building with the T-shaped working spaces for graduate students. So that's the building that looks like a cross between a sort of Swiss chalet and a Polynesian long hut. That I think, I haven't checked today, but it maybe still has a weather vane on it that has digital circuit symbols cut into the tail of the weather vane. So that building, I think, has fond memories for quite a number of us going back to the 80s. A very pleasant feature of that building was that it had quite a large common room space. It was an upstairs room overlooking that courtyard. And yeah, it was a social feature that every afternoon there was a kind of communal tea break. And we'd go there and have a cup of tea or coffee and biscuits or cake or whatever what was available. And there was a real conviviality and a sense of shared endeavour. I think that tradition survived well into the next building after that. I remember Chris Wykes, splendid and very motherly tea lady who I'm sure rescued many PhD students from despair when some technical problem had gone wrong, and she would say to them very disarmingly, well, never mind, have a cup of tea, love. First of all, I hope that in 50 years' time there still will be a Department of Computer Science at the University of York. I hope that both academics will gather here as a community of scholars who still share excitement in the field, genuine enjoyment of their work, and that there will be students who come and can share that excitement, that enjoyment, and learn something that they really will value for years to come. I'm quite old-fashioned about this. I go for the community of scholars and the sense of learning something that is actually stimulating and informative in the big sense for the rest of people's lives who come to university.